So we've talked about several kingdoms now. We've talked about archaea. We've talked about bacteria. We now finished with protists. We're next going to briefly, just for about 15 minutes or so, talk about fungi. And then next week we'll be moving into plants and then animals. Okay? So you guys already know most of the information on this slide because we've talked about it when we just went over general characteristics. Fungi, what domain are they grouped in? Imam? They're in the eukarya domain. They're all within their own kingdom, fungi. And as we talked about, fungi are mostly multicellular, but there are some unicellular fungi as well, like yeast. Yeah, you don't have the categories to print out. There's going to be some things on the slides that you don't have in your notes. You're just going to have to write down some places. So tell me about the nucleus. What word will we use to describe the fungus kingdom in terms of a nucleus? Dean?
Eukaryote.
They're eukaryotes, so they have a nucleus. They have other organelles. As you guys just told me in the question of the day, what word would we use to describe their nutrition? Grady? Yeah, decomposers, but the general term?
The heterotrophs.
Heterotrophs, correct. They're heterotrophs. And fungi obtain energy through sort of an interesting process of extracellular digestion. You know what that would mean? Extracellular? What does that prefix extra mean? Sort of, not really more.
Excess?
Not quite. So when are extracurricular activities when do they take place? After school, outside of the typical school day. Extra means outside. So outside of the cell digestion, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute, but digestion happens not within the fungus, but outside of it. Fungi, like bacteria and archaea and plants, they have a cell wall around their cells, but it's not a cell wall made of cellulose like it was in plants. It's made of another material called chitin. Same sort of material that would be found in the exoskeleton of insects. And fungi reproduce through spores and budding. And most fungi are what we call decomposers. They're responsible in an ecosystem for the breakdown of waste, the breakdown of dead organisms. Fungi are an important part of that, along with bacteria as well. So probably the most familiar type of fungus is a mushroom. But it includes other things, molds like bread mold. Mildew that grows in sort of damp, wet areas. Yeast as well. There is some bread mold, that's fungus. Here's a picture Mr. Arcuri took at his house. Mildew. And this is yeast. Yeast that are in the process of budding, which tiny little yeast is growing out of the side of this yeast. Aiden?
So yeast can mold?
What's that?
Can yeast mold?
No.
But like bread. Like,
Bread, yeah. So mold on bread is basically breaking down the carbohydrates part of the starch to get nutrients. So this is a mushroom, and we've all probably seen mushrooms growing out in the woods and your lawn and so forth. And so you have the parts labeled. Let's talk a little bit about what they do. And so maybe underneath the part that's labeled, you write in its function, because I know you don't have this little chart. So the cap of a mushroom, sort of the most obvious part. Often they're brightly colored, sometimes they're not. The cap basically protects the spores that are being produced underneath in the gills. Those lines you see when you look under the cap of a mushroom, like if you imagine if you eat portobello mushrooms, see all those lines? Those are called gills. And within those gills, that's where the spores are produced. People sometimes hunt for mushrooms to eat out in the wild, and part of identifying a mushroom to be sure it's safe to eat is often producing a spore print, where if you take the cap off a mushroom, you put it on a piece of paper and leave it for several hours, some of the spores settle onto that paper, and often the color of those spores is an indicator used to identify the type of mushroom. Those spores are the reproductive cells. They will float around and blow through the wind, land in a hospitable place, and start to grow into a new organism, a new mushroom.
So is a mushroom asexual reproduction?
They can reproduce asexually in that budding process, but the production of those spores is a sexual reproduction process, so they're sexual reproduction. The stalk of the mushroom, you might kind of think of as the stem. It basically holds the cap in the air. Have you ever seen mushrooms that have this kind of ring around them on the stalk? You know what is that? It usually comes from when the mushroom is growing and emerges. Usually the cap is sort of closed and it's adhered to the stalk. And as the mushroom grows up, as the stalk expands and the cap opens up to expose the gills, it breaks away from that stalk and sometimes leaves that ring of tissue. And that's what that ring is around the outside. And then at the bottom of the stalk are the hyphae. And these are where enzymes are produced for digestion, and it's where food is absorbed. And so the way that these fungi, you don't have to go this way. The way that fungi absorb their energy is these little strands of hyphae excrete digestive enzymes into the soil, into the organic matter. And they start to work and break down that organic matter and break it down into simpler compounds. Then those simple compounds are absorbed back into the hyphae where the fungus can actually use them for their energy. So this is extracellular digestion because the digestion is taking place outside of the fungus. So in this picture what you have is, here are some mushroom stalks, and what you see are these hyphae spread throughout the soil, and they're releasing enzymes, and in that soil there's little bits of leaves and dead worms and pieces of wood and all sorts of organic matter that still has energy in it. And as these hyphae digest and absorb that, they're absorbing those nutrients. Okay? And that's how fungus get their nutrition, through those hyphae. So fungi are decomposers in that they break down organic matter. And some, though, however, are parasitic and feed on other organisms. Okay? And some examples, athlete's foot. So this is from when Mr. Arcturi had 2 years ago, athlete's foot. And athlete's foot is a fungus that grows on a person's foot. Okay? and causes the tissue to be damaged. Again, this fungus is breaking down the skin tissue and absorbing nutrients out of it. And so the tissue, the skin becomes red and itchy and burns and hurts. Okay, grows in between toes. Okay, just like that. And so it's not very pleasant. At some point I'll show you this. These are parasitic fungus that actually, the spores land on insects, grow into them, infiltrate their brain, sort of taking over the insect, makes the insect crawl to the very top of a tree or a branch, and then it kills them. The mushrooms then grow out of the exoskeleton and break through and release their spores. So neat video to see some of that. I'll show you at some point.
Does it make it
What?
Does it make it jump off?
No, it
the tree?
affects insects. No, gets them to high up in the tree, and then it kills them, and they stay there. The caps break out of the exoskeleton, and then they can release their spores.
So what a way to die.
So fungi do have some helpful properties. In fact, antibiotics were first discovered in the products of a fungus. Okay? Antibiotics, as you know, are medications that kill bacteria. And the first widely used antibiotic was penicillin. Okay? And it came from a type of fungus, Penicillium notatum. Okay? And it grows on fruits and so forth, like on this orange. This shows what happens. So if you take some of this fungus and you grow it on a petri dish, this is the fungus. And then you inoculate this petri dish. You spread it with bacteria. This streak is where they spread bacteria across it. The bacteria will grow on a petri dish. But what do you notice around the fungus? Yeah, an area where no bacteria are growing. Right? That's because this fungus is producing these chemicals that will kill the bacteria in this area. And so scientists, when they noted this, looked at those chemicals and studied them, and that's where the very first antibiotics came from the products of these fungi. Some fungi are used in making foods. Okay, another type of penicillium fungus is used to make blue cheese. Okay, the blue stuff are the spores of that fungus. Because you can eat fungi are edible. Lots of fungus are edible. Some are harmful. Some are not. Yeast obviously is used in making alcoholic beverages and making bread. And yeast consumes sugars in the dough or in the liquidy mixture, and uses those sugars, converts them into carbon dioxide and alcohol. Okay? The bubbles of carbon dioxide formed by that yeast are why dough rises. It's why beer is carbonated. Okay? And it's why it's alcoholic, because those are the byproducts of this breakdown from the fermentation that happens in these yeast. Not that funny, but it's tough to find a fungus cartoon.
He sold it to his kid.
What's that?
He sold it to his kid.
Well, he's just saying, you know.
It was in potatoes.
You haven't done anything yet, Sonny. Often you'll see fungus growing in rings. What probably was here at one point?
A tree.
Yeah, probably there was some tree still remaining in the soil, are the leftover breaking down roots of those trees. And each year these mushrooms grow, breaking down those roots further. We have this at our house, our front yard, where we used to have a tree. Every spring, a patch of mushroom grows in this circular pattern right near the front of our house, because there used to be a tree there. These mushrooms are slowly over time breaking down the roots, using that as energy.
Why are they so strong?
I don't know, it's just how they grow. And this is ringworm, another infection caused by a fungus. It's not caused by a worm at all, but it's a skin infection. Fungi are thought to be some of the largest organisms on Earth because you have many individuals connected underground by hyphae. They're actually the same organism. But we'll watch it at some point if we have time. All right. Any questions about fungi? All right. So you can put your notes away.